Hello there and welcome back to the channel, guys. So today's video is going to be themed around top 10 champions, in my opinion, in the game who can deliver a whole lot of damage without relying on debuffs. So let's say if you were to face a debuff immune node, or as something like tenacity or rapid metabolism or what have you, champions who would have relatively most unimpeded and uninterrupted playstyle, in addition to being able to deliver a lot of damage and still be factual and relative champions in the game. Now, there are champions, for instance, whose playstyle would not change pretty much at all whatsoever, like let's say Nick Fury. You go unblockable and you can still play perfectly with Nick Fury, but a lot of his damage relies on bleeds, therefore you do miss out on quite a bit. Or on a complete opposite, for instance, Red Hulk. Red Hulk doesn't rely on debuffs at all whatsoever in order to deliver his damage. However, I do not value him quite as high on a list as I do some of the other champions. And so this list is kind of like a mix and a bundle in between many different criteria. Champions have to be great and good overall, kind of like accepted as top-end champions. Champions have to be able to perform they are as close as possible to their relative optimal rotations and playstyles, and they cannot lose out on a lot of damage. And those are kind of like the three main criteria mixed in, where I arrived to my personal subjective top 10 list. Again, keep in mind, this is not meant to be some sort of a Bible. More than anything else, it's meant to be kind of like a helpful shout out to champions who can shine in debuff immune matchups, and perhaps help some of you if you are struggling against some of these very annoying nodes that we are relatively starting to see more and more frequently. Maybe not necessarily debuff immunity exactly, but we definitely see a lot more tenacity, we see a lot more rapid metabolism, we see a lot more champions who are flat out immune to many types of debuffs, or champions who simply shrug everything off, such as, I don't know, Mole Man and Hitmonkey, so on and so forth. So basically, let's get started. I have explained the point of this list, and I hope everybody's all right with that. And we can start with spot number 10. And spot number 10, we're going old school, and we're going Star-Lord, because outside of missing your parry stun and therefore the openings you get from parry stunning opponents, Star-Lord's playstyle is effectively unimpeded at all whatsoever. Obviously, Star-Lord is unfortunately a relatively outdated champion. He could benefit from a slight buff in terms of his utility, but when it comes to damage, he has never lacked in that department. He's a very solid ramp-up champ, and yes, you will not be able to place a heal block on opponents with your level 2 or shock. However, that's far from his main source of damage. His main source of damage always has been his signature ability and ramping up and playing perfectly. So if you can play well in stun immune matchups without getting hit in the face, then Star-Lord is definitely still a great option in order to deliver a lot of damage when it actually is needed and when it counts, even against completely debuff immune champions. So Star-Lord deserves finally to be included in one of my lists, because I have been harsh on the guy. But hey, when it comes to debuff immune matchup, Star-Lord still has a damage quite up there. So now the next champion is actually going to be a bit of a curveball, and I think not many people realize how great damage output is on this champion and how little he actually depends on stun immunity, and that is Mojo. Now, Mojo has a problem with stun immunity, and that is the fact that one of his prompts actively calls for a champion being stunned, and obviously you never going to want to get stunned in a matchup. Therefore, on stun immune or debuff immune opponents, that prompt is impossible to overtake. However, you still have the option of block baiting a heavy attack, or being able to punish opponent's heavy attack with your own heavy attack, or punish their special attack with your heavy attack, and resetting the prompt. Or you can occasionally just drop the prompt, and that is not going to be that huge of a deal. However, Mojo is also unique in this aspect, where he can deliver a lot of damage on debuff immune nodes, but still bypass, let's say, damage caps that you can often see in Safeguard Rage or what have you, just because his damage is damage over time. However, it's passive and pretty much nothing in game is immune to it. Therefore, it's kind of like a very unique situation where Mojo is also probably going to get featured in one of my future videos, where I'm going to talk about most savage damage over time champions who lose the smallest amount of damage if their base damage gets capped off, and just who are able to deliver a whole chunk of damage via damage or time effects, which is Mojo as well, because Mojo places buffs, not debuffs on opponent, and when they do expire, they convert into degeneration, and then the whole hell breaks loose, and obviously then you drop a juicy level 2, which you got to very quickly because you have Mystic Dispersion, and yeah, Mojo can perform fantastically in debuff immune matchups and bypass the debuff immunity with a simple sheer fact that his damage comes from a passive effect rather than active debuff. So I would place Mojo in here because he also has a fantastic damage output, and relatively his playstyle will be unimpeded, uninterrupted, unchanged. Now we're gonna move on to spot number 8, and perhaps I should have placed Colossus a bit higher. However, fact of the matter is, Colossus delivers his damage without relying on a single debuff in a game. Now, obviously, he does lose out on the Fury, passive Fury, which he can get to converting a stun debuff with his heavy attack, so there is that alternative. However, especially due to the extra amount of damage that Omega Red Synergy opens for Colossus, and the fact that you gain armor up with your level 1, with your level 2, and a well-timed block, which does not necessarily outstun the opponent, still means that Colossus is an absolute beast. For instance, what I do in stun immune matchups with Colossus quite frequently is I parry the opponent's attack anyways, hold my block because Colossus is a tank, and if need be, he can take a hit on a block. However, most frequently after the parry, opponents typically tend to go into heavy attack, which kind of results in a plus-plus situation where I gain my armor buff and I gain an opening on an opponent. And yeah, combined with the Omega Red Synergy, this guy will deliver absolute truckloads of damage, will still have all of his utility, and will be able to perform fantastically. And that's why Colossus is definitely on this list as one of the powerhouses in Marvel Contest of Champions. Now, for spot number 7, we're going to be scrolling back to the tech list, and there are actually several techs here, but we're going to be revisiting Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. Now, anybody watching this channel know that I'm not the biggest fan of Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. However, his damage was always quite up there and was always quite big. Respected. Now, the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of him is obviously his playstyle. He kind of feels like a wind-up toy, in addition to how squishy he is. However, fact of the matter is that his damage output is one of the top, kind of like up there, kind of most stable and steady damage delivery methods when you get enough poise charges, which are not reliant on you having access to debuffs, and then just bashing in your opponent. Now, all that being said, he will lose out on ability to land his heavy attack and have that power control access for most part, because he's so squishy, he can't really block bait stuff. Additionally, you will lose out on your shock debuffs on level 2, which is some damage loss, but overall the simple sheer fact that Stark Enhanced Spider-Man is one of those champions that has an excellent amount of crit damage, excellent amount of crit rate, and still can play the matchups relatively simplistically and relatively similarly to how he would in any other situation where you can place your debuffs. I think warranted Stark Enhanced Spider-Man finally landing on a list here as well. Moving on to spot number 6, as I said, I don't want to keep this video out too long because I have realized that I like to ramble on for a bit too much in some of my videos. Anyways, spot number 6, and spot number 6 we're going to go with Namor, where he actually somewhat benefits from debuff immunity on opponents, or at the very least he exchanges his bleed damage for quicker rage stacks or rage charges and quicker access to his Imperious Rex mode, which obviously enables him to drop that level 3, get that massive fury, and all in all his playstyle is pretty much exactly the same when you are facing debuff immune champions. And yeah, you exchange your bleed debuffs for a quicker ramp up and more of those charges. And when it comes to actually delivering the damage, he doesn't rely on those debuffs at all whatsoever. Plus Imperious Rex mode, his special 2 is unblockable, which also can be super helpful. And all of that other good stuff, he still maintains all of his utility. It's not tied with debuff immunity at all whatsoever. And literally the only thing that you kind of like lose in debuff immune matchups is the openings that you would gain from the parry stun, which is the very kind of smallest amount that you typically would lose with all of the champions pretty much except one. Now, yeah, that being said, we're going to move on, and on spot number 5, I'm going to be placing She-Hulk, because She-Hulk is absolutely a fantastic example of versatility, and even though champions' typical standard damage rotation does involve debuffs like it does with She-Hulk, obviously the access to slow, and also petrifying her level 2. At the same time, she can still play perfectly well in any debuff immune matchup and actually make those matchups relatively quicker, easier, and simpler, because she typically relies on dashbacks and dashback intercepts anyways. But in addition to that, you will have a lot less struggle baiting out opponent's special attacks, because She-Hulk is kind of like this queen on a quick tempo fight, because obviously with all of those passive furies that you will be building, opponents will be throwing many more special attacks and quicker, because they will have all this taunt mechanic and they're going to be aggressive. Therefore, She-Hulk always feels absolutely fantastic in stun immune matchups, and it just typically kind of helps you to increase your fight tempo. Plus, due to the nature of how She-Hulk's damage ramp up works, quite frequently accidentally parrying the opponent is actually a downside for She-Hulk. So there's that as well. But overall, I think the fact that she can still access all of her damage, because none of the damage is connected to debuffs at all whatsoever, plus in addition her taunt abilities still work, and all of her utility coming from signature abilities still there, like she can shrug off the debuffs against science champions, so on and so forth. I think she is a fantastic champion for this list in general, because she just shows kind of like a versatility of a champion design where you might have a part of the kit with debuffs, but at the same time you can just forget about them if need must. And yeah, now we're going to be moving on to our top 4, and top 4 is going to be Guillotine 2099. Now, Guillotine 2099 is kind of like a modern day Star-Lord, with steroids, a little mix of Aegon in there as well. But the fact of the matter is that Guillotine 2099 will ramp up her damage no matter what you do, so long as you don't lose your combo. And yes, you will lose out on a couple of abilities that she has, like you will not be able to place the Spectre debuff with your level 2, you will not be able to as easily drop your heavy attacks in order to gain that combo shield, and you will not be able to place degeneration debuffs on your opponents if the opponents are debuff immune, quite obviously. But still, at the same time, her main source of damage is based to her combo meter. Up until 100 you gain an attack increase, and then past 100 to 600 I believe you gain energy damage, which is not tied to any debuff at all whatsoever. So she still has most of her utility. She can still power drain with level 1s. She can still have her armor buffs, regen, immunities, power steal, life steal, what have you, whatever you need based on situation, and deliver a huge amount of damage to the fight when it's necessary. So I think Guillotine 2099 very deservedly found her way quite high up top on the list. And now we're going to have to talk about our top 3 spots, and they are also kind of like directly tied to how highly I value each champion individually in perfect conditions. And in spot number 3, today we are going to go with Aegon. Actually, no, I'm going to do a bit of a flex, because earlier today I duped my 6-star Aegon, so we're going to showcase him. But anyways, Aegon in its base core hardly ever relies on debuffing the opponent. Now, yes, he does have quite potent bleed on his level 2, but one of the more popular kind of like ways how to use Aegon typically involves suicide masteries and abstaining from your level 2s anyways. And in addition to that, it's definitely not the main source of his damage. The main source is obviously his critical hits, which he gets plethora of once his combo is built up. And all in all, he does not rely on debuffs at all to kind of like further maintain his typical playstyle. And yeah, he works perfectly in many different matchups where opponents are debuff immune, or they have rapid metabolism or tenacity or what have you, because all of his abilities are still there, they're still active. He can still shrug off debuffs on his own, he can still crit through block, and that is extremely beneficial in stun immune matchups, because you can just keep bashing opponents' block without ever having a real need to get a proper opening, or eventually he will go unblockable and unstoppable and all that other good stuff. So yeah, Aegon's absolutely fantastic when it comes to delivering a lot of damage in debuff immune matchups. And spot number 2 is going to go to my little Cosmic hero over here, and that is Corvus Glaive. Now, Corvus Glaive does place armor breaks whenever he stuns parries the opponent, and obviously that somewhat increases his damage output, but realistically those armor breaks don't really do all that much. They look nice and it's nice to have them for when you need to break opponent's armor and all that stuff. But in its essence, he has true damage anyways in his base kit, or true strike with Proxima Midnight, and that alone, plus the way he plays, obviously is quite greatly beneficial in debuff immune matchups. Additionally, he keeps vast majority of his utility, and pretty much anything you can do with the Corvus in a regular matchup, you can do in a debuff immune matchup as well. There's not much difference there. He still has his cheat death mechanics. He can still bypass damage from bleed, shock, or what have you, and have those beautiful crits. Now, when it comes to including Hitmonkey on this list, I'll be honest, well, first and foremost with Hitmonkey, I haven't had any experience, and I know people say he's a new skill Corvus. I personally think he's far worse than skill Corvus, but even if I would ever value them even on relatively similar level, Hitmonkey's damage still also gets supplemented quite significantly by access to those bleeds and critical bleeds, so he would still be a champion that loses out on a lot of damage, even though he still has quite a bit left over. Anyways, that's me done crapping on Hitmonkey, and obviously I think there's going to be no secret to who should deservedly be champion number 1 on this list, and it's Ghost, because Ghost doesn't even try to debuff the opponents in a regular matchup. Ghost is the only champion on this list that doesn't even want to parry stun, or doesn't get disturbed by not having access to parry stun at all whatsoever, because you typically get your openings by phasing opponents' attacks. Ghost inherently cannot place any debuffs on opponent outside of parry stun in normal matchup, which is very rare and typically happens by accident. And yeah, none of her kit revolves around ability to place debuffs on opponent, but all of her kit kind of revolves around big crits, guaranteed crits, phasing opponent's attacks, and just dealing a whole ton buttload of damage. So Ghost is obviously number 1 here. Debuff immunity is not a factor at all whatsoever when it comes to Ghost, and that's quite as simple as that. Now, I know there are going to be more options that people are probably going to comment in comment section. For instance, I know that many people are going to mention Omega Red, who he doesn't rely on debuffs, it's just the sports and they're like passive. Yeah, but still at the same point, for instance, losing parry stun for Omega Red is quite a big deal, because it significantly changes the fight, makes it a lot more difficult, plus not being able to land that heavy attack, and basically the fight when you fight debuff or stun immune opponents with Omega Red looks completely differently to how it would if they would not have any of those immunities. Same as I said, there are champions like Red Hulk who are still able to deliver all of their damage whatsoever, relatively unimpeded. However, I just didn't value them quite high enough here. And again, this is not meant to be a Bible. This is definitely like a subjective list, kind of like a shout out, hopefully helpful shout out to several champions, and possibly some of you will benefit for when you are looking for options on how to deal with debuff immune matchups. And that being said, next video that I'm gonna make in next couple of days is going to be champions who have like some incredible massive damage over time effects, and most reliant, consistent, and beneficial, I guess you can say. So yeah, next are going to be the champions who can bypass damage caps with damage over time effects and are absolute beasts. So all that being said, I'm done here for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. If you have, then hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit all the buttons, and well, yeah, I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya.